This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by ArtTactic.com, where we've just redesigned our entire website. Make sure to check it out, and any reports or subscriptions you buy, make sure to use the promo code PODCAST15 to get a 15% discount for our podcast listeners. Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. While much of the art world's attention is focused on major hubs like New York, London, Hong Kong, we think it's just as important to highlight what's happening beyond these centers. Because there's incredible work and innovation really taking place all over the world. We've also noticed a growing trend of curators moving into director roles, either within their institutions or at new ones. So we wanted to explore both of these themes further in this week's episode, as we're joined by Kelly Baum, the John and Mary Pappajohn director of the Des Moines Art Center. Before taking on this role, Kelly spent several years as a curator of contemporary art at the Met, where I got to know her quite well. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Kelly, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Adam.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you here. So I think it's important on the podcast not to always focus on the major art hubs like New York or London that always get so much attention, as there are really amazing things happening in the art world in so many different locations. So to start things off, tell us what inspired your decision to leave New York and your role at the Met as a contemporary curator to take on a leadership position as the director of the Des Moines Art Center in Iowa.
Well, it's been a huge transition. It's been exciting. I would say what inspired me to leave the Met and transition into a director role here, it really was the Des Moines Art Center. So fundamentally, it was the Des Moines Art Center that inspired me to leave. I had been working as a curator at different institutions in Texas, New Jersey, and New York for almost 25 years. And in 2018, I attended the Center for Curatorial Leadership. And I joined that program not intending to become a museum director. I wasn't sure if I wanted to become a museum director. I knew that I wanted to acquire leadership skills. I knew I wanted to be a more successful curator at the Met. I left that program in May 2018 after having shadowed Annie Philbin at the Hammer and taking classes at the Columbia Business School, the Rice School of Business in Houston, and I was hooked on the role and the potential of leading an institution. And so the next step was just finding the right institution, and it turned out to be the Des Moines Art Center. I actually wrote an essay for a catalog at the Des Moines Art Center in 2007. So I'd known of the institution. I'd known of the curators and directors who'd worked here. I'd followed their program. And so when I received an email from the search firm that was running the search for the new director, I was immediately intrigued. And it turned out to be the absolutely perfect institution for me. Has an exceptional collection. Its exhibition history is really extraordinary. It has a tradition of taking risks on artists, risks on projects. It also has an art school, and there are very few museums in the country that have an affiliated art school. This is a non-accredited school, but it does offer classes for adults and youth. So I would say that it was everything about the Des Moines Art Center, the institution, its holistic approach to collection, exhibition making, community engagement, and the teaching of art that really drew me here. I would say the last piece of the puzzle was the board. So in December, I had my first meeting with the search committee. And the search committee consisted of both trustees and honorary trustees of the Art Center. And it was after my very first conversation with them, I remember calling my husband, and I said, if they offer me the job, I will take it. The board is exceptional, smart, engaged, committed, and they're just as committed to the Art Center as they are to the city and the people of Des Moines. And I thought to myself, I would love to work with this group, and if they want to work with me, then I'm in.
Well, in your last comments, you mentioned that the museum has historically taken risks in both the artists it acquires as well as the exhibitions that it organizes. And I think for institutions outside of major art capitals, that willingness to take risks is essential, not just in achieving aspirational goals, but also in rising to prominence within the broader art world. While many of our listeners may be familiar with the Des Moines Art Center, I imagine fewer have had the chance to visit. Can you share some background on the museum and what's the story behind its founding and how has it managed to build such an exceptional collection despite being located outside of a major art hub?
Well, I would say that there are museums, a lot of museums outside of New York, Chicago, and LA that have built exceptional collections. And sometimes I wonder if that distance from major art markets is part of their success. You definitely have some freedom, some flexibility that maybe you don't when you're embedded in those markets and those communities. I certainly miss those markets and communities. I miss being close to them. I miss having them at my fingertips, but I don't mind the autonomy that comes with some distance. So about the Des Moines Art Center, it's an exceptional place. Not just the collection, not just the sculpture park, the exhibitions, the art school, also the architecture. And that has everything to do with inspired donors and inspired leadership. So in 2023, the Art Center celebrated its 75th anniversary. We opened our doors in a building designed by Eliel Saarinen in 1948. We opened a second building in 1968 by I.M. Pei, who was at the time an up-and-coming architect. And then in 1985, we opened our third building by Richard Meyer. Richard Meyer was also just beginning to break out on the scene. So the campus is extraordinary. It's sited in Greenwood Park, which is about 5-6 miles from downtown. We have a beautiful and exceptional campus. It really is a modern institution. Its roots go back to the teens, 20s, and 30s. There was a fine arts association in Des Moines that hosted exhibitions, that collected art, actually quite ambitiously, and also taught art classes. In the 30s, James Edmondson, 1933, James Edmondson made a gift. It was part of his estate. And that gift, which consisted mostly of land, was intended to support the creation of the state's first freestanding independent museum. That gift was, it was brilliant. It was inspired, and it was essentially a kind of a prompt to the city of Des Moines. This gift will become yours if you move to create an art museum. And that finally happened in 1948. The Art Center was the first museum to open after the end of the Second World War. So the collection, again, was the result of really inspired and generous donors. Probably most importantly, a woman named Winnie Ewing Coffin. Winnie also promised part of her estate to, this is in the 1930s, to a future art museum. Proceeds from a trust that she established was intended to fund the acquisition of art for the Art Center. And if you explore our collection online, you'll notice that many of the most prominent and important works of art in our collection were purchased with funds from the Coffin Fine Arts Trust. And so that's what got us going. I would say that the next most important moment really occurred in 1969 with the arrival of the brilliant and extraordinary Jim Dimitrion. Jim was working in Southern California. He was part of a group of experimental avant-garde artists, curators, and museum directors. He was tempted away from Southern California to the Des Moines Art Center in 1969. And Jim's decision turned out to be crucial. Jim decided to pivot the Art Center, and this is with the support and leadership of the board, decided to pivot the Art Center away from encyclopedic collecting to modern and contemporary art. Jim had the vision to understand that the Art Center really had been founded too late to create a collection of encyclopedic art that would rival Cleveland's or New York's. Our funds and our history and our position were really better suited to collecting contemporary art. And that's what Jim started to do. And so he began to acquire works of art by living artists not long after they were made. Ellsworth Kelly, Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg. It's very interesting to compare the dates works of art entered our collection with the years that they were made. And again, I think that decision made all the difference to the Art Center. That focus is what has allowed us to build a really exceptional exhibition program and collection.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, as you mentioned, when the museum was established, essentially its limited funds meant that pursuing an encyclopedic collection wasn't a feasible option. There simply wouldn't be the budget to acquire outstanding and important examples across so many different periods of art history. But by focusing on modern and contemporary art, the museum had a real opportunity to build a collection of exceptional works.
Your money is going to go further if you focus on the art of the present day. That was the position in 1969. Now we are not only a museum of modern and contemporary art, we also have a small but wonderful collection of historical art. And those are pictures and sculptures that often get requested for loan. John Singer Sargent, Henry Osawa Tanner, Rodin, Goya, and visitors come to the Art Center to see these works. Brancusi, Picasso, and more. Our collection has also been kind of built through the exceptional generosity of women collectors, including Louise Noun. Louise Noun was really a kind of founding patron to the Art Center. She was also a feminist, a civil rights advocate, a social justice warrior. She built a really wonderful collection of art by women artists, and she donated a part of that collection to the Art Center, and including many pieces from the early 20th century. So not only a museum of modern and contemporary art, but primarily a museum of modern and contemporary art.
So having been in Iowa for about a year now, what are some surprising aspects about either the Des Moines Art Center or Iowa or this region of the country that you think more people in the art world should know?
Yes, well, I had never been to Iowa until I arrived in January 2023 for my interview. I had never stepped foot in the state of Iowa and actually had spent very little time in the Midwest. I'd been to Chicago and Minneapolis. So I had a lot to learn about the city, the state, and the region. It was new to me. It was very new to my family. So what has stood out? This is a very creative, entrepreneurial city. There is so much still to be done here. There is so much promise and possibility in the city and the state. There's room to experiment. There's room to make things happen. There are a lot of artists who live in the city and in the state. Relatively inexpensive place to live, and that often becomes a magnet for creative people. So the city is catalyzing a lot of creative entrepreneurial energy, which I like a lot. We have a remarkable nonprofit studio in town called Mainframe Studios. I happen to serve on the board, and this is a nonprofit that provides studio space to artists at cost. So the city is really trying to support and build its community of makers and creatives. It's also a very philanthropic city, and I learned this even before I arrived. Everyone in the city is kind of bound by a service ethic. In Des Moines, everyone gives back, and they give back selflessly. If you have a dollar, you give a dollar. If you don't have a dollar, you give of your time. You volunteer. But I appreciate the spirit of philanthropy, really selfless philanthropy that pervades the entire city of Des Moines. I find it really quite moving and quite inspiring.
As we discussed, you spent many years as a curator, most recently at the Met. What has the transition from curator to director been like? And how has your experience as a curator actually shaped your approach to leading a museum now as a director?
Well, I wanted my first director job. I didn't want to leave curating behind, I guess you could say. And so I wanted to find a director position that would allow me to be involved in curating without micromanaging. I wanted a position that might permit me to continue to curate, rarely, of course, but occasionally. And it turned out that the Des Moines Art Center is exactly the right institution for that. So I have an exhibition coming up in 2026, not quite ready to announce it, but it's on the books. I'm still very involved. I work closely with the curators on acquisitions. But the transition, when I attended the Center for Curatorial Leadership in 2018, I learned that I have an interest in and an aptitude for all of the other facets involved in making a museum run. So I wanted to get more involved in accounting and finance. I wanted to get more involved in buildings and grounds. Operations, policies, procedures, they all fascinated me. So I am on a learning curve. It's a steep learning curve, building new muscles, but I love it. I have 11 direct reports, and they span development, finance, and operations to communications, buildings and grounds, and of course, the obvious departments, curatorial registration and installations. I am involved in every facet of the Art Center's work, and I really enjoy it. I would say, changes that have happened to me, to my mindset, I have become maybe more passionate about my work, ever more passionate, but less sentimental. So you have to be able to make hard decisions. You have to be able to really get in the weeds and prioritize. So I care more than ever before, but I'm probably less sentimental about the work. I take the responsibility very seriously. And you have to be able to balance, as a director, all of your sometimes competing responsibilities to multiple stakeholders. I would also say that if it's possible, and this is despite having worked in museums for 25 years, if I respect every single person who works in a museum that gives to a museum more than I ever have before. I have more respect and also sympathy for museum directors than I ever have before. I have more respect and sympathy for trustees. Trustees give so generously of their time. They are not paid for their work, but they spend hours, dozens of hours every year advising, counseling, and giving. Trustees are really extraordinary. And I also have more respect and sympathy than ever before for the people who work in museums. And I was a staff member for 25 years. But I worked collaboratively across departments. But as a director, you come to know your people in a way that's very intimate. I know not just my direct reports, but their direct reports. I manage a team of 100 people, and I truly care about them. And in fact, caretaking and stewardship are priorities that are baked into the new strategic plan that we're launching this month. And so respect for the people that make museums run, directors, trustees, and staff. And that has been a kind of moving, almost emotional transformation that's occurred since I stepped into the director role.
And so if we think about today's art world and how museums operate within it, given that you're leading a museum in Iowa rather than maybe, say, New York or LA, do you think being in that geography creates certain opportunities for you? And also on the other side, what are some challenges of being in Iowa versus one of the larger cities?
Opportunities and challenges. So I talk about those all the time, and sometimes the challenges are the opportunities. So one good example of a kind of twinned opportunity challenge would be the fact that the Art Center is the only art museum in the capital city of Iowa and one of the few art museums in the entire state. So we are part of a cultural ecosystem, but an ecosystem that does not include many other art museums. And so that means that we have an enormous responsibility. We serve tens of thousands of people who do not have access to another art museum or sculpture park or art school within a 2 to 3 hour drive. Now, within that makes our work, I would say, lonely. I do feel lonely. I wish I had, other museum directors at my fingertips. The job is hard. The job is tough. Luckily, I'm now a member of the Association of Art Museum Directors, which is a brilliant brain trust. And network for museum directors. So I'm in touch with them over email, Zoom, and phone calls. The work can be lonely, and it's not just me. It's our director of operations and finance. It's our director of buildings and grounds. It's our curators. We don't have peers who are at our fingertips. That means that we just build relationships with people at other kinds of cultural organizations, other nonprofits, institutions of higher ed. Drake University and Grinnell College, for instance, are great partners. So that is the challenge. It's also the opportunity. I think there's something really beautiful in the fact that tens of thousands of people will encounter art for the first time here at the Art Center. They will see their first and potentially only sculpture by Wengeche Mutu, potentially their first and only painting by Doran Langberg here at the Art Center. This is a place where epiphanies are going to occur again and again. I think that's very exciting. I think, another opportunity really derives from the fact that we're the only art museum in town. It means that we must have and can have very close relationships with other institutions, organizations, but also communities. We are very much a grassroots organization, and we partner with, just as part of our community access program, 35 local nonprofits to build and co-create programs for communities together. So we want to be embedded in the local, but we also want our programs and exhibitions and publications to resonate nationally and to secure all that national recognition, visibility, and support.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear about the relationships you're building locally and within the region. I'm curious, how do you approach whether we're talking about exhibitions, acquisitions, or just the overall operations of the museum? How do you approach balancing that strong local presence while also maintaining visibility in the broader national art conversation?
I would say that was one of my mandates when I arrived, was to raise the visibility and recognition of the Art Center. The Art Center is doing incredible work, and I would say it is work that's recognized quietly by artists, by galleries, by other museums, but it's quietly. And now we want that recognition to be more prominent, a little bit louder. One of our strategies has been to to begin trying to secure support from national foundations. And I'm excited to say that we've already achieved success in that realm. We received our first grant from the Terra Foundation for American Art in recorded history last year. That was thrilling. We also received a grant from the Every Page Foundation. The Tiger Foundation has twice now surprised us with grants in 2023 and 2024 to support our programs, and so we're beginning to build that national network, and that goes to securing broader national recognition. We're also bringing some exciting exhibitions to town. The Fier Les Bayas exhibition, which debuted in Boston and is now in Vancouver. Its third stop is in Des Moines. It will be here in June. And we also want to begin traveling our exhibitions nationally more regularly.
Well, it's really fantastic, everything you're doing at the museum. And I know you mentioned the Fier Les Bayas exhibition you have upcoming at the museum. What else can you share with us in terms of programming at the Des Moines Art Center?
Yes, so 2025 is going to be a thrilling year. This is really the first year of exhibition programming that was built with me and our three curators. We have three extraordinary curators, one who has been on staff for many years. She has great experience and institutional knowledge, and then two new curators, Laura Beth and Ashton. So in June, we open the exhibition on Fier Les Bayas. Around the same time, we're going to open a really wonderful project called Light Within Ourselves. And that small exhibition features work from the Waterloo Art Center. Waterloo is in Iowa, the birthplace of Nicole Hannah-Jones, who spoke at the Art Center this past summer. The Waterloo Art Center has the largest collection of Haitian art in the country. It's in Waterloo, Iowa, and we're partnering with the Waterloo Art Center and Grinnell College to bring to fruition a research project and a small exhibition that will of Haitian art that will be on view at the same time as Fier Les. We're also working with the artist Eliza Nissenbaum on an exhibition in the fall. Eliza is our Tim and Tony Urban International Artist in Residence. And then in October, around the same time we celebrate Day of the Dead with our Latinx community, we're going to open an exhibition on the Mexican photographer Manuel Alvarez Bravo.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like you have a packed exhibition calendar. We're looking forward to following along. Kelly, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast and sharing your perspective, being a museum director coming from a curatorial position previously, as well as sharing your insights on everything that's going on at the Des Moines Art Center. And if our listeners want to follow along to the exhibition schedule or learn more information about what you have going on at the museum, where can we find you online?
Yes, so DesMoinesArtCenter.org. Just Google us. You'll find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, website. Sign up for our newsletter. Yes, we love to host guests. And so, Adam, I hope you come to visit one day soon, too.
I definitely will. Thanks so much again, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Adam.